Hello everyone friends, today our story begins at night in a very ordinary apartment, where a young man named Frog plays his game and does not want to go to bed. And so after another keystroke, he finally manages to defeat all opponents, and his teammates do not get tired of praising him for a good game. Everyone has a friendly atmosphere, and everyone is happy that the guild really becomes invincible, thanks to their strong leader. Sprinter even said that thanks to our leader, they became the first guild, which managed to defeat a new version of the boss. Absolutely every member of the team has exalted and praised our leader, wondering and hoping that he will be just as popular and strong in reality. At a time when the guy was the most ordinary boy in glasses, who only did that day and night playing video games, and sad that the sense of accomplishment gained in the game disappears as he soon returns to the real world. Our hero, as you guessed, is called Frog and has the same name as the main character of his favorite comics. He looks like the simplest student, who has no height, no appearance and no financial strength, who also wants to have the attention of others, exactly the same as he is given in the game world, but unfortunately he understands that he's just another regular college student. And at this point, Frog is seriously starting to think about what would be really cool if he was just as strong a guy, who would look like a superhero, only in the real world, where he would fight monsters and be happy to protect the planet, which he has already done many times in video games. He had already begun to imagine how after his heroic actions, he would automatically attract the attention of a huge number of girls, who would admire him and agree to do absolutely anything he asked. He was already making up answers and phrases in his head, in case the fans ran up to him. Well, that would be really, really cool, thought Frog, with his mouth open, that came out of his dreams. And one late evening, when he was playing his computer games again, he received a notice, after which he was very surprised. Who is it that writes me so late? It turned out that it was wrote by the wizard, named Little Prince, who just joined the guild with a very interesting proposal, that really surprised our hero. She asked him if he had any time on Saturday, and asked him to go on a date. Of course, our hero was absolutely not ready for this, but was very happy that he was invited. But, he is also haunted by the thought of whether the character may be an ordinary old man, or someone else. The thought of which actually made him nauseous, and he decided to put these foolish thoughts out of his head as soon as possible. But when he realizes that he has neither money nor good looks, he realizes that he simply can't care about what, and the fear of forever being alone does not satisfy him, so he decides to take a step towards the unknown. And still continue the dialogue. Even though his hands were shaking before writing the lyrics, he still agrees to go to his first date in the park tomorrow. From the surprise and new experience, he even cried out in the middle of the night, even waking up his neighbors. He could barely sleep, but the next morning, after the alarm bell, he woke up a different person. Very quickly turning it off, he packed up, dressed and ran to his first date in life, even forgetting to close his front door. And so, 10 minutes later, he came to an incredibly beautiful park, called Hushin. Everything was very beautiful, and everywhere there was pink cherry lilac, which did what reported to the whole world, that today will be a really beautiful and unusual day. Parallel to this, standing on a pedestrian crossing, Frog stood and wondered what would happen to him. He could not hide his excitement, and whatever he did, the thought of waiting for him today aroused him. And he was holding a bouquet, and waiting for the right moment. The thought that today, he would finally change his life, inspired him, and after the green light, he went and tried to explain to himself his current state, and how he was feeling. Amidst a huge crowd, he noticed that the closer he got to the meeting place, the faster his heart started beating, and his legs were shaking. Frog also noted that because he had been constantly bullied at school, and now, the fear of leaving immediately weighs heavily on him. But he also wants to be brave, but can't control his excitement, thinking about what his date will be and how he will go out with a girl. But, having decided that there is no point in dreaming anymore and that everything he will learn very soon, that's why he starts to step forward, without looking around, and at the red light. Falling in love, he said, "This step today is the beginning of my decision to change my nature as an introvert. After that, everything will be different." The people standing next to him, at the traffic light, started shouting, trying to stop the dreamer. Just at that moment, the truck was at work and was racing, at a notably high speed. As for the city, not knowing anything, and not expecting to see any pedestrians, on its way. Seeing the boy, he starts to honk and jerk the rudder, in order to escape a serious collision, which can change the lives of both participants, move in the opposite direction, but he absolutely sees, and hears nothing on his way. His thoughts are now completely immersed in a date that will completely change his life. And here, bam, boom, buzz. And the truck at speed hits our hero. His flowers fall to the floor with him, and he begins to regret that he will not live anymore. Absolutely all pedestrians are in shock. People are trying to do something to help the young man, but his consciousness begins to fade, and the thought that he will never see the girl and never have a date is one of the last things he remembers. He doesn't regret anything in his life, except playing computer games all the time, but not spending it in real life. It is also a very popular regret of people, and in the real world, who live only in the virtual, and do not develop themselves in any reality. As soon as his consciousness fades, he has a download screen in front of him, like in video games, in which he tries to find out what happened at all. To which he receives the following response: "You would accept it soon, I am your system." After a long conversation with the system, he realized that after the truck crash he had completely reincarnated into a new world and was being called to embrace a new reality. He resists and wonders what is behind his new eyes. And the system explains to him, "You have just entered your new body, and it needs time to adapt. Please calm down." Calm down. He is still forced to take a new body, and a new reality that appeared before him. But Frog is absolutely not satisfied, because he wants to work on himself in the previous world, so he does not want to go into the new. But the system convinces him by saying, that if he completes his entire mission, he will be able to choose reincarnation, and return to the original world, before he was hit by a truck and go on his date. Of course, after such a dialogue the situation becomes much more interesting, and the hero asks, "What task do you want me to perform?" He is asked to take his time and is recommended to first familiarize himself with his new body, and get used to it, before accepting a new mission. When our hero does ask where his arms and legs are, the system simply decides to show him who he really is. In the reflection he sees no one but snails and forest, and when he lowers his eyes below, he is as surprised as possible. After all, he could not believe in such a thing, since now he is not a man, but just an ordinary mushroom, that grows in the forest, which was simply impossible to believe. As you will recall, a young gamer, named Frog, was in a hurry to go on a date, and unfortunately, was unable to attend it, because he was hit by a car on the way. He's reborn and has to fulfill some important mission, to be reborn and go on a date. But, the only thing he knows about himself so far, is now his body, in the form of the simplest mushroom, which is in the middle of the forest, surrounded by snails that do something, to look at each other, and chew the grass. And absolutely nothing else. Frog was so stunned, that it wasn't even able to describe the shock he was in, and it was totally normal. Seeing how difficult it was, the system immediately contacted him, and welcomed him to a new location, also surrounded by many snails. "I understand your feelings and worries, it's really hard to take everything in one moment," the system said. "But, since the game has already started, it means only that there is no time to delay, simply know and you need to develop and absorb all the information, as soon as possible. Which is why all the information is going to go into his mind, right now, so he can stop being distracted, which he certainly can't understand yet. Now, he knows this world is filled with both magic and miracles. Despite the fact that every region of the world is full of magic and uncertainty, they are all united by the same natural ecology, which is on the brave continent. In the past, humans and monsters have lived in harmony and helped each other in various situations. Strong monsters did hard work for people that they couldn't do, and those people who have succeeded in using magic have used it to help monsters close their basic needs for survival and prosperity when faced with challenges. Everything was fine, harmony was everywhere, everyone was happy. Until one day, a terrible event occurred, when a fearful and dark demon, named Golem came to the village, and brought terror to all its inhabitants, both monsters and ordinary people. Golem was the top of the monster, everyone thought he was the leader, but he hated that people thought they were above him. He decided to take revenge on them, so he assembled an army of demons, to attack and conquer the territory of the people. The people did not stand by and gathered all their strength, to defend themselves, which gave rise to many guilds that, on the king's orders, began to destroy the monsters en masse. Finally, after the combined efforts of 6 brave and strongest warriors, they were finally able to defeat him and close. Because the demon golem's magic power was so strong, the warriors distributed it in 6 different places: Castle of Time, Colorful Desert, Underwater World, Wind Valley Grassland, and even Pulse Volcano. And also, in Land of the Dead. And even after the big monster was shut down, the mainland was never able to return to its former state, which was a harmonious atmosphere, as harmony was already broken, as humans and monsters could no longer live together, as before. Despite the fact that the demon golem was printed, his faithful followers still continued to nightmare people and wander the lands, causing chaos and panic everywhere. They also tried to find ways to create unrest that would allow them to find and free their king. Here comes again a system that explains to our newly selected hero that if a big demon golem had been successfully released, then the brave mainland will be overwhelmed. After these words, Frog's body was covered with cold sweat with fear and understanding of what was happening. After all, this is precisely its main mission, to prevent the destruction of the continent and to do everything that this did not happen, and that is why he was chosen by the system. Time is running out, and the frog mission is already beginning. Whether he has any more questions, he can ask them right now. So, without hesitation, he asks again to clarify that if he succeeds in his mission, will he be able to return to his home world and go on a date? The system responds, bingo, which confirms the agreement. So, our hero gets his brain so boiled, and he goes on a rampage, saying, "Bingo, your ass, if you want me to win, then turn me into a hero, why did you give me the mushroom part?" Angered and amused, Frog falls to the floor and tries to get up. But, the system once again asks him to use his body more slowly, and hurry as the new task is coming. After unsuccessful attempts to get up, he asks the system to turn him into at least a skeleton or goblin. Snails and spiders will also fit, but to move like a mushroom is really, very, very difficult for him. Why did the system turn it into a mushroom? Because moving becomes very difficult, especially for the protagonist. He gives up and loses faith in himself, beginning to think that he will never again return to the original world, as he cannot defeat such a monster. But the system does not matter what the player has decided, as the game will start exactly when it is supposed to, whether Frog wants it or not. The countdown begins, and the snails run away to their sides. Then the system gives him a mission in which it tells him that he must survive a certain amount of time, because they are approaching. Frog was shocked to see the sound and the light at the end of the tunnel, and wondered just one question: who is approaching him? As soon as the countdown ended and the game began, a gang of schoolchildren with sticks flew into the woods, which began to run around and shout that they would destroy everything. Frog is likely to survive this massive attack by schoolchildren, as it is still a simple mushroom that can't even move. As it is with such skills to overcome the fierce monster, it is not clear yet. But our story does not end there, and only begins to develop more and more. Meanwhile, the story continues, and our main character, Frog, is still trying to recover from the shock and influx of schoolchildren, eager to destroy absolutely everything in their path of schoolchildren. He really understands that they are very dangerous, as they destroy everything in their path, without any remorse, and he still has to try to survive in order to remain unharmed and reach the next stage. That is why he rallied from everyone, using all his strength, and quickly jumped back to the nearest cover. After all, one should not exclude the fact that children can be like a monster, and there are no guarantees that they do not pose any danger to him. Perhaps, they are also here to destroy it, without any remorse, just as they have already done to the snails, on numerous occasions, and continue to do so. Just look at what they are ready to go, to further, mock defenseless snails, using the example of one schoolboy who, even at the risk of being punished by his mother, simply takes and steals her laundry pole, which will help him destroy advanced red snails, in a matter of seconds. Defenseless, snails don't even know where to go anymore, and just try to hide, at least in their shells, because, unfortunately, they don't have enough speed to escape. Children begin to insult and mock snails, shake them out of their shells, simply hit them against various objects, and raise them to a height, much higher than the one at which the snails are used to being. Just like that, for fun. Seeing all this, the green snail was very frightened and began to run away abruptly, with all his might, to save himself. But this, unfortunately, was not enough at all, and she was just as suddenly caught, when she did not even have time to look around. Perhaps, not all of them are savages, because our green snail was picked up by a beautiful girl, who began to praise her beauty, and thought about taking the snail into her home as a pet. To which, he had a happy and at the same time very surprised look, that he would not have the same fate as his teammates. But first, the girl decided that it would be more important to improve and collect materials for transmission, in the first place, and began to laugh very hard, and squeeze the snail. From this, she simply could not stand it, and shattered into pieces, it would seem, at the hands of such a sweet and, at first glance, naive girl. I collected one, but there are still 9 of the same, the girl said with a laugh, and threw the green snail, along with the pot, into her inventory, which she also threw into the depths of the forest, as if nothing had happened. While all the children were having fun and laughing, the snails continued to run away, trying to somehow escape such an influx of strangers, in order to survive. Now, it is not surprising that Frog, who, by the way, watched all this from a height, was given such a seemingly easy task, one of the very first. It is scary to even imagine what tasks, on the way to the monster, will await him further. Seeing a sad and unpleasant picture of what was happening, he reported that he no longer felt that he was playing a game, and had changed his thinking. Now for him, these children are exactly the same, real monsters. And then immediately, a sharp blow, and bang, bang, from which one of the school children simply flew off at great speed into concrete, losing almost all of his health and the desire to continue destroying snails. On this, he lost almost all his experience points, and his wooden stick was also damaged, and he himself will be teleported back to his village, where he came from. All the surrounding school children, who a second ago were having so much fun, suddenly froze and began to look at what was happening, as well as at each other, with incomprehension. Chew, chew, chew. Suddenly, out of nowhere, there's a harsh scream and a snail biker appears in front of them, even though he usually rides a snowboard. His name is Snail Daddy. Since childhood he has dreamed of being a biker, although he usually snowboarding all alone in the woods, although he loves his family very, very much. Meanwhile, Frog keeps looking around the corner, and realizes that this character is really different from all the previous ones, and it would be nice to know his level and get to know him in more detail. To which the system immediately answers and shows the result. It turns out that the ability to identify characters is one of the superpowers of our hero, that we have already learned. Suddenly, a crowd of schoolchildren spotted Daddy Snail and, disregarding what had happened to their comrade, abruptly wanted to destroy him, and take Snail for their collection. They jumped on him en masse and a fight broke out, with banging and dust flying from all corners. But Daddy Snail was not as simple and ordinary as the previous snails, and was already able to give them a really strong and good fight, as a result of which, he defeated and sent back to the village, almost every schoolboy, who attacked him. Already on his way back, the snail is stopped by an unknown voice, who informs him that his skateboard was broken first and kids left the snail to be caught. Remembering his skateboard, and the happy moments associated with it, the snail begins to cry and get angry at the same time. But, there is absolutely no time, and the phrase continues, "I have been waiting for this moment, since the last time you defeated me. I must destroy you," said the unknown man, and ran at him with his sword. Chew, chew, chew. Out of anger, Daddy Snail also began to run at his opponent to get revenge, primarily for his skateboard, which can no longer be returned, thanks to which the battle began. The snail outpaces his opponent's blow, and bites his leg with all his might, then starts trying to do it even harder, in order to get revenge. But, unfortunately, the boots turn out to be protected and no significant damage was done to them, and the snail itself flew away from the impact of the foot far into the woods. The opponent continued his insults, emphasizing that without his skateboard the snail is absolutely nobody, and he, in turn, prepared and created his equipment for about 2 months, because of which, the snail now cannot overpower him in any way. Rising from his fall, Daddy Snail was ready to go into one last fight, and the thought that he must defend his family filled him and gave him strength, for it was because of it that he could not afford to lose in any way. Frog couldn't stand it and also started shouting words of support, from the bushes with all his might, toward Daddy Snail. But, one precise blow and everything ended very, very sadly. The snail fell unconscious on the floor, where its story had already ended. We lost another bright and kind hero who only wanted to protect his family. The opponent could not be pleased, and even showed respect to him himself, stating that he was indeed a difficult monster, after which he began to pull him out of his shell, rejoicing and laughing, that he really could do it, and could also become brave. Looking at this whole picture, Frog quietly began to gnash his teeth in horror and, standing under the tree, as a mushroom should, quietly mutter the question of whether he could even stay in this place unharmed, and who would come to save him, after all. But, do not forget that this is only one of his very first missions, which he must pass flawlessly. Hearing some strange sound in the bushes, someone stopped abruptly. It was our frog's voice, which everyone heard, even though he was speaking in a whisper. It was another schoolboy, who decided to have a laugh and see if there really are more snails out there, trying to hide from them. As they got closer to the bushes, and opened them, the children still find our mushroom, which clearly also could not expect it, and begin to scream loud and strong, with fear and panic, because this is not the snail that they are so used to seeing. After the children first saw the mushroom in the bushes, they were immediately seized with panic, from which they began to scream loudly and tremble, just like the mushroom, which clearly did not expect to be found. After such an outcome of events, all he had to think was that he would simply be destroyed, like all the other inhabitants of the forest, and his mission would fail, which means that he would never be able to return to his former world. But, everything turned out as well as possible, because after the children saw the mushroom, they began to run away in a panic and scream for help, telling absolutely everyone that there was a mushroom monster. From what he was, to put it mildly, at a loss, because what he did was incomprehensible even to himself. They were just scared of him, which the system itself even informed him about and recommended opening the attribute panel, to check his level and skills. Frog continued to be surprised and could not understand, how he did not even know, that he had such a function, and, of course, immediately specified how to use it. Seeing his statistics and skills, he was also not particularly surprised, that for the children and all the previous participants, he was a monster of a much higher level, which actually can be seen from the statistics. A smile and a fighting fuse immediately appeared on his face, from which he immediately asked to open the list of skills that he has in order to familiarize himself with them. Identification helps to see the level of opponents, and find out information about them and their skills. And Mushroom Ting Ting is his ability to attack. This made Frog's eyes light up, a smile skyrocketed, and he continued, due to the fact that they are all beginners, this is enough for me to become the dominator of this rookie village. After all this information that Frog received, his happiness knew no bounds. He began to laugh, calmly jump and understand that at first it was just damn difficult to be a mushroom, but not now, when he learned so much new information. He began to imagine that the system deliberately did everything in such a way, as to make it as easy as possible to introduce him to the village of beginners. Now he was only interested in where his prey was, because he had already accepted the fact that he was a monster and began to call himself that. Approaching the place where the girl destroyed the blue snail, he noticed people who drove the snails out of the forest, and also stepped on and beat the shells with sticks. Gathering his strength, he decided to once again experience the feeling of a superhero and abruptly jumped out of the bushes, declaring, "I will let you see how great I am." And he immediately used his magical power, which immediately carried a wave of blows and simply destroyed those monsters, so to speak, that humiliated and destroyed the snails. "It was very easy," said Frog, for which the system gave him +5 experience points, just like in real games, which he loved to play so much before. The surviving monster, who was leaving somewhere, was simply shocked when he saw that his friends were no more and could not understand what had happened here. Here Frog did not lose his head, and immediately his eyes glowed red, and a demonic smile appeared on his face, which seemed to be just waiting for this moment. From such a picture, the student was simply speechless, his body was in a cold sweat, and, the only thing he could say, "It is not time yet." And immediately, while there were forces, he tried to escape, flying away on a branch from a tree. When he was able to run a little higher, his face was still scared, and he continued to tell himself that the time for monsters had not yet come, and he did not understand how such an advanced monster appeared here. But our frog was unstoppable. He laughed and asked the schoolboy, "Does he really think that he can run away from him in this way?" And, without waiting for an answer, he immediately jumped, firmly grabbed the branch and tried to get to him, but, unfortunately, he did not succeed, because he had not yet fully learned how to use his body. Frog realized that there are some difficulties in being a monster and decides to let the opponent go for the first time, as there are still plenty of others in the village. And he just starts to retreat without taking any action, but this outcome of events seemed very funny to the schoolboy, and he decided that now, since he is sitting at the top, he will not be reached. And he decides to mock the mushroom, as they used to do it with snails earlier, by throwing a stone at it. It was something that Frog could not have expected in any way. He began to scream in pain. But, this only made him laugh, because he turned to the schoolboy, saying that he is very, very brave, since he so easily ignores the fact that Frog is a monster of a much higher level. And now, after a second, in front of him is no longer one, but a whole army of armed schoolchildren, whom he called in order to catch the mushroom. Frog also noted that the idea is pretty good, but the risks for them are also very big. Jumping up, the ground beneath him shook, and his eyes glowed with a red light, after which he continued, "Which is also not an ordinary monster." Thud. And Frog again uses his mushroom ting-ting, and flies towards the army of schoolchildren to show them, who is really in charge here. It so happened, that Frog flew into the fattest guy on the team, who was trying to use a shield for protection, built from wooden planks. They managed to break it, and the fat man flew back a few meters, but the team decided to take advantage of the moment in which Frog had not yet had time to recover in order to use it to their advantage. They quickly split up on the sides, some to the right, others to the left, and the main schoolboy, who gathered them all here, was left in the middle, from which he did not mind, because he immediately began throwing stones at the mushroom. After the first hit in the body, Frog lost as much as 4% of his health, and this really pissed him off, because it really hurts. And he certainly will not forgive him. But, stones now began to fly at him from all sides, from almost every member of the school team. They kept throwing as many rocks at him as they could get. Thus, they wanted to destroy this monster and win the battle. Frog, receiving such damage, was clearly shocked, because he passed every hit with a stone through himself, and his health was constantly taken away. He realized that this is not the right way to fight, because the monster's steps are not so free and obvious, and to face the tactics that are directed against him is not the best solution. Fortunately, this did not last long, and the frog's skills were already restored, and you can use them again. Immediately, without thinking, he uses his mushroom ting and flies at his attackers. But then, out of nowhere, the fat man takes out a piece of his shield, which regenerates sharply, and again tries to stop the blow of the mushroom. At that moment, another student with a sword appears, who asks to hold the monster a little to show him how good he is. To which the schoolchildren report that they left the mushroom just for him, so that he finally gets rid of it. Drawing his sword, he jumps out and strikes, shouting the phrase, "Go die." From which Frog was quite shocked, which is not particularly surprising. The sword cut off part of his cap, the marks from the blows of stones and the sword were everywhere. It was really very difficult for him to resist them. And he decided that he had had enough of such torment, after which he came to the realization that a weak team can use their strengths and tactics in order to defeat stronger opponents together. As he himself did this many times in the game, when he was still in the previous world. And he decided that if he could collect them all in one place and knock them out at the same time, then he would really die. At that time, blows and stones continued to fly at him, and his health was simply taken away. At one point, he starts to vomit and falls to the floor, and his pupils changed dramatically. It seems that he still could not cope with his opponents. At that moment, the students ran up to him and began to wonder if they really destroyed him. And after a few seconds, they began to rejoice and jump for happiness, imagining how everyone in the village would be surprised when they found out whom they were able to defeat. But only here the girl could not understand why she still did not receive experience points for the victory. She began to think that all this was probably due to the fact that the difference between their levels was too big, and decided to clarify this point with her comrades. At that moment, Frog began to smile heavily and decided to give her the answer himself. All because I pretended to be dead. Ordinary monsters won't be able to understand such advanced tricks. And I finally got you all together. There was hatred in his eyes, and for the last time he tried to implement his plan to destroy his rivals, because he understood that he simply had no more right to make a mistake. With the last of his strength, he again hits his opponents and his level rises, which means that new opportunities are already opening up for him. All of his opponents were destroyed, and the mushroom itself began to shine brightly with white flames that could be seen from every corner of the small village. When he opened his property bar, he saw that all his indicators had now been restored, and he was full of strength and energy again, and all the pain from injuries had disappeared. True, his face was already a bit like a human. But, he became a little sad and lonely from the fact that he was still invincible. This victory brought him a lot of joy and self-confidence, because he continued, I was here to ambush a brave schoolboy to gain experience. What else can you do for me? After these thoughts, he seriously thought that in the near future, when he left the village, he would be able to calmly fight the main monster without any problems. And then, out of nowhere, rumble, which really scared the fungus. Shit, I just got hit by thunder. What's wrong with this weather? Frog thought. And then, misunderstanding again appeared in his eyes, because again 3 unknown people came at him, who began to insult him and told him not to show his weak skills now, because it looks really very terrible. Then a level 18 mage comes closer to him and says, the mission said that there is a monster messing up the rookie village. It turns out to be a little mushroom monster. The archer interrupts him and says that no matter who he is, just get rid of it and get the bounty. Here another warrior intervenes in the conversation and says that he really misses this, and if it were not for the task with the 2 elders, he might not have returned to the rookie village. Looking at this whole picture, Frog was simply frightened and at a loss, because 3 heroes had just appeared in front of him at once, who were several times higher than him in level, and now it is absolutely incomprehensible what they will do with him. They will simply destroy him or take him to your team. Our story continues with the fact that the main character, named Frog, was immediately surrounded by 3 monsters, which are several times higher than himself, and who have not yet decided what to do with him, destroy or leave alone. And then, in the hand of one of them, a lightning bolt quickly appears, which, apparently, was intended for our hero, because they sent it at full speed right at him. Seeing the whole situation, Frog was seriously scared, and he urgently needed to take some measures, in order to at least stay alive. Immediately, without time to think, he tried to duck, in order to at least soften the force of the blow that was flying straight at him. And the lightning, by the way, was so strong that it could be seen and heard from every corner of the forest. Due to the fact that Frog was able to dodge a little, it only touched the top of his head, although it took 14% of his health from him, which greatly affected his well-being, because he really experienced stress now, and his whole body was covered with cold sweat. He realized that this was a planned magic attack, and he actually met an advanced opponent, who might also need to complete the task. At that moment, the trees continued to whistle and break from the blows. From this, he jumped and realized that the only correct decision that he could now make was to simply run away, since he still had no chance of winning this confrontation. And he decides to use his power mushroom Ting Ting to the maximum, but this time, not for an attack, but in order to quickly hide and run away. His rivals continued to look at the situation and wondered how a monster of such a small level, yet crazy, really plans to run away. Therefore, they sent one of their company to catch him and solve this issue. And now, our Frog will now be attacked by another monster, who asks his teammates to calm down and not worry. His main idea is to practice on Frog his new skills that he has just learned. From this idea, he simply cannot hide his laughter. He hits the ground with an axe, and it immediately begins to burst at the seams. And in front of the mushroom, which was flying so fast, a huge stone wall suddenly appears, into which it hits at full speed and also loses -10 health points. At this moment, a sign pops up for him, which informs him that his health level is critically low, less than 50%, and he should be more careful and replenish it urgently. The blow against the wall was so strong that it spun and rang. But time was critically short, and just at that moment, for the final touch, an archer joins in, who wants to hit and destroy the mushroom with her arrow. She lets go of her hand and an arrow flies at great speed, which pierces our hero completely, and demolishes another 23% of his health. What's what, and he absolutely could not expect this, because he did nothing bad to them. And it was absolutely incomprehensible why he was punished. All he had to do was just save the world. At great speed, he again hits the stone wall and breaks through it completely, then bounces back a few meters. The system comes back into play and tells him that it's game over for him while he's still bouncing off the ground at high speed. And so, he finally stops and lies on the floor, and smoke begins to come out of his body, due to the huge friction that has formed. But who knows, maybe it's even his soul. At this time, the braves approach him and begin to discuss the current situation. One praises the archer for her accurate hit and invites her to compete in the future. And she promises to think about if she will be really invited. Their entire conversation is stopped by the magician, who at the very beginning launched a lightning projectile at our hero. He suggests that everyone together take the reward for the destruction of the fungus and move on. Here, a system appears in front of Frog again, which begins to scold him for calling himself a master of the game and gives him the opportunity to use Resurrection Coin, but only once. To which Frog, lying on the ground, manages to answer and reproach the system for asking him very, very stupid questions, because, of course, he agrees. And then a miracle begins. The entire area around which Frog was located abruptly begins to glow, with a bright white flash, and a window of achievements opens for him, in which he is congratulated on the discovery of a new skill that he can use in battle. At this time, he had already fully recovered, and the scars and bumps on his body simply disappeared. Literally a second of time passes and then, an explosion, during which the entire space was filled with the ejection of spores, and absolutely nothing was visible. At that moment, the heroes were at a loss. They began to cough, and the most important of them was very surprised that mushroom monsters also use skills, because he had never encountered this before. And since Frog didn't have time at all, he needed to escape as quickly as possible. Therefore, while a smoke screen hangs over him and nothing is visible, he decides to use his mushroom Ting Ting one more time, in order to escape from this place and be saved. Unfortunately, he did not manage to do this without a trace, and the archer noticed him and began to shout loudly, so that the others would also hurry up and catch him. The entire brave team began to run after him, and the only way to continue the game and survive for the Frog was to successfully escape. He flew, although he saw that he had 3 opponents on his tail again. Adrenaline went through the roof, which is why he bravely tried to jump with all his might, despite the fact that he is a simple mushroom, which used to be so difficult to move around. During the flight, he asks the system how much time he has left before the mission ends. To which the system answers him that there are still 3 minutes and 21 seconds left to live. Scrolling through this data in his head, Frog realizes that in just 3 minutes he will be able to complete this task and receive his reward for survival, namely, hardening and limbs. Thanks to each of these rewards, his ability to survive will only increase several times over. And then, again, lightning, and the sky, covered with dark clouds, which had never been before. Apparently, his rivals were very angry. Lightning struck right next to him, to which Frog asked only one question: did they have come? He abruptly continued to run and could not understand how they could find him so quickly, because he covered the entire area that was near them with smoke. And then a mark sign appears above his head, which points directly at him, from which Frog absolutely does not understand what is happening after all. It turns out that they pointed a prey tracker at him, which hunters usually use, in order to mark the prey and catch it easier. The archer comes closer and begins to talk to him that she did not even know that the mushroom could come to life again, but now it will become a simple prey for them, since the mark has already been placed. The same opponent who had attacked Frog for the first time again rushed into battle, laughing and shouting that the end would really come to him. He was furious, and for some reason everything around him shone, with a terrible, red light. Frog tried to jump away, but, unfortunately, the shock wave caught up with him faster and he fell again and began to bounce off the ground, after which, at great speed, he hit a tree. He understands that he has already used the only coin that allowed him to resurrect, so he no longer has the right to be defeated, and this is his last chance. He is still pressed against the tree, and tears began to well up in his eyes, because the blows and opponents were approaching him, closer and closer. Almost immediately, they continued their attack and used the magic combo cut, which cut the tree into pieces, and also touched the mushroom a little, which made him cry, and he again lost -18% health. He immediately became angry and decided that he would not die this way one more time. With the last of his strength, he once again used spore eruption and made a smoke curtain around his offenders, who could not see anything beyond their hands, but continued to laugh that this trick would no longer work. The archer took out her arrow and said that with the help of her mark, she could shoot even if her eyes were closed, after which she immediately began to do so. An arrow flies from her hands, breaks through absolutely all the trees that stood in the way along the way, and with phenomenal accuracy again hits our hero and pierces him through. From what was happening, everything around him turned red again, his body was very badly injured, his parts scattered throughout the forest. And he again fell to the ground, since he no longer had strength and nothing remained. Then the system kicked in and told him that he was down to the last percentage of his health, and was on the verge of finishing the game one more time, only this time for good. While he was lying exhausted, the steps of opponents were quickly approaching him, who wanted to finish what they had already begun, and take away their awards from him. But then suddenly, a timer appears near Frog, with a countdown, 5, 4. While all this is happening, his rivals continue to praise him and say that he is really special, because he knows how not only to use skills, but also to survive and hide. Their leader agrees with this and decides that it is still better to finish the job and eliminate their rival, although at the same time, the countdown continues and is already at the number 2. The magician begins to charge a small magic ball in his hand to finish off the helpless mushroom, when suddenly the number 1 appears and again the system comes to Frog, which reports that the time is up and the mission has been successfully completed. At this moment, the birds begin to sing and fly again, and his opponents again begin to dialogue with each other, where they remember that they have not been in the village for a long time and refuse to believe that this is happening. One of them does not understand what happened and tries to find out what they are talking about. Suddenly, a giant teleporter opens in the sky, causing the opponents to panic, and the main of them shouts and urgently orders to retreat immediately. Suddenly, the teleporter begins to absorb mushrooms, but not one, but hundreds of mushrooms exactly the same as our Frog, which are still not entirely clear where they are flying, but the only message they leave is it is time for the monster tide. Looks like something very serious is coming. Subscribe and like. The story of the brave mushroom, named Frog, continues, because he successfully completed the first part of his mission and now, he and hundreds of exactly the same mushrooms, are sent by teleport to a new world, as something very serious is approaching. Despite the fact that the main opponent of Frog, who wanted to destroy him, ordered a retreat, someone clearly did not agree with this. That is why, one of them, with a sword in his hands, ran to destroy absolutely everything in his path, destroying one mushroom after another, until they had time to finally teleport. After all, he could not miss such an easy opportunity to gain experience points. That is why the enemy with an axe used all his skills and abilities to destroy as many mushrooms as possible in the shortest possible time. There was joy and satisfaction on his face, because he had just risen in his own eyes, due to defenseless mushrooms. In response to this, the head magician, who was the leader of the company and ordered the retreat, began to scold his ward for being a complete idiot who does not know anything about the monsters of Rookie Village, from which they had already left. But he does not listen to him at all and insists that he should not be so self-confident, because no one condemns him for being an idiot. And he continues to embarrass and insult the leader, declaring that he can go on his own if he already wants so badly. The archer keeps up the conversation and asks the leader to leave him alone, as the village has barrier protection and he will be fine. In response to this, the magician simply made a haze and left. The archer ran after him, leaving her self-confident partner, who had so much fun, but at the same time, asked not to condemn them if he suddenly died. Seeing this situation, he simply could not believe that they were so stupid, because what could happen to him if he just continued to destroy and gain experience while his teammates were just standing in front of him. Suddenly, the teleporter suddenly begins to glow with a bright white light, from which 2 more new mushrooms fly out. The face of the daredevil changed dramatically, and his whole body was covered with cold sweat, because he did not understand what was happening. Is it really a bunch of mushroom monsters? He began to tremble with fear. As soon as he raised his head to look up, he saw something very unusual, namely, a mustache and a beautiful smile. Suddenly, the teleport closes and a huge mushroom jumps out of it, the leader of mushroom monsters, who sends his troops to the village every 7 days. Rumor has it that he is looking for the secret of the lost mushroom. Seeing the mushroom, the enemy was very frightened and even let go of his weapon, begging for at least someone to help him. Without hesitation, the king immediately jumped on him with all his weight and called the mushrooms closer to him. From such actions, the enemy was instantly destroyed and went back to Rookie Village. Now all his experience gained over the past few days will be lost. While his former teammates ran away, the magician began to talk about what an idiot he was, but the archer stopped him and advised him to start thinking that if the boss could catch up with them, he would do exactly the same with them. The king of mushrooms found our frog in the forest, who lay exhausted and marveled at the mighty power of his savior, because he continued to believe and hope that he was here just to save him. At that moment, the king took out his sword and swung it with all his strength, ordering his mushrooms to move in the direction where the frog lay. After that, all the mushrooms began to jump sharply, according to the issued order. And so, the whole team of mushrooms ran past ours and absolutely no one wanted to help him, while he was ignored and continued to lie on the floor, having a wound in his body from an arrow that had gone through him even earlier. But he did not lose hope and asked them not to leave, because he is exactly the same mushroom that needs help. But only a pig appeared near him. Once again he asked for help, with the last of his strength, and closed his eyes. In the meantime, he fell asleep and woke up only because someone had sprayed a fire on the street. The heat that he emitted warmed the body of our mushroom very much. That is why, although not the first time, he woke up and abruptly opened his eyes. "I'm alive, what kind of place is this?" Frog said and abruptly tried to get up. Watching what is happening, he sees a lot of mushrooms, which, apparently, have already been destroyed. From the information he sees, he becomes uncomfortable. He turned his head and saw a pig, exactly the same as the one in front of him, at the moment, when he closed his eyes and begged at least someone to come to the rescue. "There are the remains of mushrooms, and a pig everywhere, just don't tell me from this." He was very scared, and cold sweat and fear appeared on his face. At this moment, the pig was eating up the already destroyed mushroom, which, apparently, was destroyed by just the same enemy, the king of mushrooms eliminated. At that moment, the pig suddenly turned around, and its eyes became very, very red, like it was not ready to see Frog right now. When he saw this, he clenched his teeth tightly, and the pig at that moment continued to eat the remains of another mushroom. Seeing this picture, our hero realized that, most likely, this pig would eat him if he stays here. That is why it is very important to have time to escape, while the pig is still eating, because then she will not be up to him. He tried to move, but screamed sharply. He began to worry very much about the lower part of his body. It turns out that she ate it. And Frog was simply shocked, because how will he exist without the lower part of his body? How can he move now? At this moment, the pig begins to approach him, wagging his tail. Is she coming here? What now to be? Our hero begins to think about what to do. Perhaps it is worth pretending to be dead, since the pig should not understand that he is still alive. At this moment, she became closer and closer to our hero. That is why he closed his one eye and began to worry that she was approaching. With the last of his strength, he closed his eyes, in a panic at the approaching pig, who starts grunting and stares at him with demonically red eyes that instill fear in the eyes of those who look at them. At that moment, she began to sharply grunt and scream at him. In response to this, Frog closed his eyes with the last of his strength and tried not to open his eyes and also, not to make any sound in order not to be detected. At this point, the pig continued to throw out the remains of the mushrooms from its mouth, which is what a pig is supposed to do. It turns out that what she just threw away is just the same, the lower part of the body of our protagonist, which he was actively trying to find a minute earlier. But why did she throw it away? What's wrong with that? Even Frog himself began to think about it. because, perhaps it was a medical pig, because after she began to chew and spit out the remains of other mushrooms, he began to regenerate. All this is easily explained by the fact that after she threw the remains of his body into him, he began to restore his health. And after the pig had done all that, it just kept on walking as if nothing had happened. No, she came back and started pushing our frog to get well soon, because she began to radiate her love for him. It turns out that it was a very kind pig, which had very good intentions. She wanted to help Frog survive, and it was she who saved him at the moment when he needed it most. All this time, while he was lying unconscious, the pig lay next to him, looking and kissing our mushroom, so that he would quickly recover and return to his previous state. She even continued to sleep with him in order to control everything and not miss anything. At this moment, the first rays of light begin to seep into the cave where they were, which first of all begin to wake up our pig. She rises and is very surprised. Panic begins to cover her, because, looking around, she cannot now find Frog, who so badly needed help. She continued to look around the area, and look around, but still, in the whole cave, she could not find our main character, whom she so badly wanted to save. That is why she immediately began to growl and, discouraged, she became very upset because she had lost her friend. That is why, without wasting a second, she ran along the entire cave in order to try to find our main character and help him, since he had already become her best friend, with whom she did not want to say goodbye. Perhaps her intentions were much darker than we think, so we can only guess. After all, absolutely no one can say what is in the mind of a pig. But, before running away, she put out the fire with her hind legs. It turned out that it was at the moment when the dead night came, Frog really was able to escape. Without wasting a minute, not knowing the exact intentions of that pig, he decided to run away, because he really has a very important mission that he must complete. He understands that such a chance should not be missed and he needs to run and run again, because if he dies, it will only be at the hands of the boss, because being eaten by a pig will be just a shame for him. That is why, because of all his strength, he is trying to escape, but what is it? Is it really an earthquake? Frog refuses to believe it and asks that his thoughts still not be confirmed. But unfortunately, all this is true, and a huge fat pig is really running after him, which chewed and spit out the lower part of his body into him. Perhaps, she really loves him and just wants to help, but he cannot know this. Just the same, now we will check it. In a panic, Frog asks her to back off and get behind him, but she is getting closer and closer. Frog realizes that the pig is indeed much faster than him. He no longer had the strength to run, and his body was covered with sweat, as he fled with all his strength, just not to get caught in the pig's teeth. And then Frog recalls that he also has superpowers, or in simple words, skills. He uses his skill to completely smoke the entire area so that the pig cannot find him. The poor pig was frightened and really did not understand what was happening after all. But, when she saw this picture, and everything that happened in the cave, she was simply surprised. Her eyes began to shine, she was extremely happy and radiated only positive energy. She grunted sharply, and, it seems, nevertheless, she decided to fight. Although at first glance, she seemed to be a completely tame and kind pig. She just took and inhaled absolutely all the contents that Frog used to make a smoke screen. And now, literally 10 seconds later, everything that Frog created was completely in a pig, and only the name remained from the smoke screen. At that moment, the pig saw the frog, and her eyes began to shine with stars again. A smile immediately appeared on her face, and her mouth was wide open, from which saliva flowed. It looked like she really wanted to eat it. When Frog saw this picture, he was seriously surprised and continued to sweat because he really needed to run away from the pig. And you can't understand in any way whether the pig wants to do him good, or wants to eat him, because the frog is just trying to run away, and behind him, the pig rushes, with such kind eyes, at first glance. But Frog does not know what to do, he is very scared, that is why he asks for help from the system to help him. Fortunately, she really answers him very quickly and Frog asks her if he completed the task, looking for confirmation in his words. The system agrees with him and asks if Frog wants to receive a reward for the task right now. Well, since he has no time, he agrees and asks to get a reward as soon as possible in order to escape. The system offers him a choice of two rewards, either it will be a hardening, or it will be limbs. After analyzing both sentences, Frog thought that the hardening sounded pretty good, but what about the limbs? Thanks to them, he would be able to safely escape and also, to resist some monsters. That is why, without thinking twice, since, after all, he has a huge pig behind him, which either loves him or wants to eat him, he chooses limbs as a reward. And very quickly begins to transform. Frog's body is already becoming similar to a human. Well, since he still, at least somehow, looks like a man, he remembers that he has a fist. That is why he takes and beats with all his strength the pig that pursued him. The blow turned out to be really very good, and thanks to the fact that they also gave him legs, he was able to start running away many times faster, which of course is really very good. It was these thoughts that our protagonist had. This was his plan to save him from such a situation. Having finally analyzed his choice, Frog nevertheless decided that now it's really better to get arms and legs, since his combat skills and movement would become more effective for him now. The system clarified whether Frog was determined, and he, without a doubt, immediately chose the limbs, after which, his transformation immediately took place. His eyes immediately began to shine, he jumped, and slowly but surely, limbs began to appear from his body, arms and legs. Everything began to happen exactly as he imagined it, only there was a small nuance: his arms and legs were not the same size as human ones. They were just arms and legs that matched the size of the mushroom, there were no phenomenal shapes. But at first this did not upset our main character at all. The only thing he said after he received it was that now it's time to really bring down. His eyes lit up and he ran as fast as he could, thinking that he was now very, very fast. But all this went on at most, for about 2 seconds, because after all this, he looked at the ground, and at how he was moving, because all this time, he really, almost stood still and barely moved. The prize he received so far has not helped him in any way, and in 30 seconds of time, he ran 2 meters at most. The only question he asked after he realized that he could not move normally, is that, are these 4 stumps really called limbs? And while he was analyzing all this, and looking to see if it helped him or not, he remembered that a huge fat pig was breathing down his back, with red eyes, which it was not clear what he wanted to do with him, either eat or help. From such an unexpected award, Frog again begins to get angry at the system for giving him something bad and absolutely unnecessary again. At this moment, the pig is getting closer and closer, and starts the jump. She jumped up and, with her kind eyes, jumped on our main character who so wanted to escape from her. Immediately she grabbed it and turned it over with her several times. After that, the pig stopped and started hugging him. She was really very pleased, and began to lick him, after which, Frog asked her to leave herself alone and let her rest a little, since he couldn't get rid of her. She continued to lick and stroke him, after which, Frog was able to think of it and used his skill, namely identification. He looked at the pig, and realized that she was very kind, but when she gets angry, she becomes very aggressive. It turns out that she was also level 10, which surprised the frog very much. That is why he asked the system to open information about himself again, and it turned out that he already had level 6, since he was still able to complete the mission and get enough experience to get promoted. It turned out that he had already improved identification, but still, the gap between him and the pig is too big in levels. I wonder if he can even escape from her embrace, because the difference is still big. Especially if you remember what happened a little earlier, when 3 opponents who were at a level above him almost destroyed him twice. At that moment, the pig became very alert. She looked at the end of the tunnel, and saw something there. She began to grunt. And suddenly, in her eyes one could see a strong fright. It looks like something very terrible is coming. It turned out that the pig just started running in circles and grunting towards our hero. Frog, of course, was so perplexed. He asked the pigs what she was doing. If she was not going to eat it, then he could just go on. Suddenly, something terrible happened. The earth began to spin underfoot, and stones also began to fall from the upper section of the cave. Both Frog and the pig were very scared, since an earthquake did happen. Meanwhile, on the street we see fog, and it looks like it's not an earthquake, but a whole volcanic eruption. So it's so possibly wrong, as the stones started to break off and fly to one place. Seeing this picture, Frog was frightened, and began to run away with all his might, although he would not mind if he was also picked up by a pig that ran as soon as danger arose, leaving the mushroom to its fate. He decided to ask her for help, to which she was only delighted, and immediately turned around to pick him up. With all her might, she ran towards him, despite the fact that the debris fell right next to her. She successfully ran around them and finally approached Frog. And, the only thing she did was grunt and with all her might, threw Frog onto her back with her nose. From which he, to put it mildly, was shocked and delighted at the same time, because he had never had to deal with this before. Immediately after he sat down, the pig began to run at great speed, from which Frog even rolled his eyes. But there was absolutely no time, it was necessary to be in time before the cave was completely filled with stones. The jump and, fortunately, Frog and his new hero successfully jump out in the last seconds, as immediately after, the cave is completely pelted with rocks. If they did not have time, most likely they would have remained there until the end of their lives. From this turn of events, Frog already lost consciousness, when suddenly, the story continued to develop. It turned out that 5 monsters began to look at them from the cliff. After they got closer, it became clear that these were also pigs, which differ from ours. Frog was also surprised and asked his girlfriend if they were her friends. Then I opened the statistics and realized that these are wild boars that live in packs and try to drive away weaker monsters. Suddenly, the wild boars lowered their heads in front of the leader who had a fire built on his head. They exchanged glances with our pig in disbelief for a long time. It turned out that their leader was already level 35, so the newly formed team needed to retreat immediately to avoid problems. Following them, wild boars began to grunt, led by their leader, driving them out of their territory. But the story of Frog, along with his new friend, is just beginning to develop, and very soon we will see a continuation, because there are so many more things that you could not even guess about. So, please follow to watch more content, like and write down a comment to support me. See ya in the next videos.